The White Desk and the Ice Coffin. Prologue. The Secret in the Oval Office. Every day, the most powerful person on Earth sits behind a desk in the Oval Office of the White House. It is a magnificent piece of furniture, heavy, dark oak, carved with intricate neoclassical designs. American presidents have signed declarations of war, historic peace treaties, and sweeping executive orders upon its smooth surface. It is known as the Resolute Desk. Most Americans know it as a symbol of presidential power, but if you were to run your fingers along the grain of that wood, you would not be touching American timber. You would be touching the remains of a ghost ship that refused to die. You would be touching
that turned into one of the greatest maritime adventures in human history. Chapter 1. The Disappearance of the Century. The British Empire in the mid-19th century was the undisputed ruler of the seas, but it had one glaring, frustrating blind spot: the Northwest Passage. For centuries, European nations had dreamed of finding a sea route through the icy labyrinth of northern Canada that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was the ultimate geopolitical prize, a shortcut to the riches of Asia that would bypass the treacherous waters of Cape Horn. In May 1840,
they were never seen alive by the civilized world again. By 1848, the silence from the Arctic had grown deafening. 3 years had passed without a single word from Franklin. In London, Lady Jane Franklin, Sir John's fiercely devoted wife, began a relentless campaign to force the government into action. The British Admiralty, embarrassed and deeply concerned, launched a series of massive rescue expeditions. They offered astronomical rewards, the equivalent of millions of dollars today, to anyone, British or foreign, who could find a trace of the lost ships.
Chapter 2. The Grip of the Ice. The summer of 1852 was deceptively kind. The HMS Resolute, under the direct command of Captain Henry Kellett, pushed through Baffin Bay and entered the treacherous waters of Lancaster Sound. Kellett was a seasoned sailor, respected by his men for his calm demeanor and practical intelligence. As the months rolled on, the temperature plummeted. The sea began to change. To keep morale high during the terrifyingly dark, sub-zero winter months, Captain Kellett turned the Resolute into a bustling community. The crew established a printing press on board, publishing a humorous newspaper called the Queen's Illuminated Magazine. They held costume parties, put on theatrical plays on the icy decks, and organized lectures on science and navigation. But outside the wooden walls of the ship, the Arctic environment was a nightmare. The sun vanished for months at a time, plunging the crew into total psychological darkness. The temperatures dropped to -40, -50, and sometimes -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead, the great ice shelves shifted, groaning and screaming under immense pressure. The sound of the ice attacking the ship was described by the crew as a constant bombardment of artillery fire. Giant walls of ice, tens of feet high, would suddenly rise out of the flat plains and crash down toward the vessel. The Resolute was trapped deep in the Viscount Melville Sound. She was no longer a ship. She was a prison. To survive, Belcher made a radical, highly controversial decision. He issued a formal command to all captains: abandon ship. Captain Henry Kellett of the Resolute was furious. He knew his ship was strong. He believed that if they just waited a little longer, the ice would break and they could sail her home. He protested vehemently, arguing that abandoning a perfectly sound Royal Navy,
Their personal belongings, leaving behind thousands of pounds of supplies, scientific equipment, books, and logs. Captain Kellett sat in his cabin and wrote a final entry in the ship's logbook. He placed it on his desk, next to a glass of wine and a Bible. The crew climbed down the wooden sides of the ship onto the frozen ocean. They began a grueling, agonizing march across miles of jagged ice toward the open water.
Chapter 4. The Ghost Voyage. What happened next defies all laws of probability.
It is a sequence of events so extraordinary that if it were written as fiction, it would be rejected as impossible. When the summer of 1855 finally arrived, an unusually powerful warmth swept through the Arctic. The great ice pack that held the Resolute in its frozen fist began to crack, split, and move. But it didn't crush her. Instead, the ice acted like a massive protective cradle. The ship was completely silent. In the captain's cabin, the glass of wine still sat on the desk. In the galley, the pots and pans hung from the ceiling, swaying gently with the motion of the ocean. Below decks, thousands of books remained dry on their shelves. The Resolute drifted for over 1,200 miles. She had escaped her frozen prison on her own. Chapter 5. Discovery in the Fog. In September 1855, an American whaling ship.
Her sails were missing. Her rigging was tangled and draped over her sides like cobwebs, and her decks were covered in a thick layer of snow and glittering ice. No flag flew from her mast. No smoke rose from her galley chimney. Buddington signaled the mystery ship. There was no response. He blew the whaleboat's horn. Only the lone. They moved toward the main hatch and shouted down into the darkness, "Hello! Is anyone there?" Nothing but their own echoes. Holding lanterns, they descended into the belly of the ship. What they found blew their minds. The ship was in near perfect condition. There was no water in the hold. It wasn't sinking. In fact, it looked as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. When they entered the captain's cabin, they found Captain Kellett's uniform.